God, forgive me. Please, baby. Forgive me.
This procedure crosses the line between abortion and infanticide.
Many Americans have no idea how far things have gone in this country. They had no idea that the law even permitted something as grotesque as partial birth abortion.
No woman should ever be subject to this procedure. It's just a cruelty.
I wanted to pick one of his little feet up and show it to the mother and say, look what you just did. I said, God, why are you letting this happen? Why? Why does this have to happen? This is murder.
Behind the marble white columns of our nation's highest court, a single gavel falls across the American soil, sending the certain sounds of God's judgment upon its inhabitants. Partial birth abortion is now the law of our land.
What the court has said is that the right of a woman to an abortion means the right of a woman to a dead baby, irrespective of the procedure being used.
Under the doctrine of the Supreme Court, a living, just delivered baby, no matter how premature, is a person under the Constitution.
In other words, no one can second guess the opinion of the doctor in this case. So if the doctor says this is the best interest of the woman's health, irrespective of whether the AMA, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, every other medical school, every other certified organization in the country says that this is not a safe procedure, it doesn't matter.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
No hospital does this procedure, none. There are no hospitals that do partial birth. There is no text that treats this as a legitimate procedure, that teaches this procedure in any medical school or any kind of training of obstetricians to do abortion. This is a procedure only done for the convenience of the abortionist and only done at abortion clinics who do second and third trimester abortions.
5 Supreme Court justices passed sentence on their unseen enemy and marked a dark day in the course of human history.
So what you have here is a rogue procedure with rogue doctors who have no qualifications as experts, but the court gives them the supreme rule and gives them all of the 100% discretion as to whether this is in the best interest, irrespective of what the medical evidence is. And in fact, the court goes a long way to say it doesn't really matter.
In an effort to stem the tide of such an unconscionable act, Senator Rick Santorum has recently authored and sponsored legislation to stop the tidal wave of abortion in our nation.
My God. Appendicitis. Not an appendix. That's not a blob of tissue. It is a baby. It's a baby.
Can the liberties of a nation be sure when we remove their only firm basis? A conviction in the minds of the people that these are the gift of God? That they are not to be violated but with His wrath?
The partial birth abortion procedure is performed mostly in the 5th and the 6th months of pregnancy, sometimes late, sometimes in the 7th month or even later than that. This is a medical model of a baby at 4.5 months, 20 weeks. This is the earliest stage at which a partial birth abortion would generally be done. So this is the smallest the baby would be who is a victim of a partial birth abortion. Many are much larger.
This procedure is different than other abortion procedures that are done later in pregnancy because the baby is delivered, in a sense.
The partial birth abortion procedure was described in this paper by Ohio abortionist Dr. Martin Haskell, written in 1992. It describes step by step how this type of an abortion is performed. We had these drawings done which depict in visual form what is described in the paper. In the first stage of the procedure, the abortionist is actually watching the baby on a TV screen using an ultrasound machine. This allows the abortionist to reach in with forceps and grab a baby, usually by a leg, turn the baby around, and begin to deliver the baby, while still alive, into the birth canal. At a certain point, the abortionist is able to grab the baby with his hands and continue to deliver the baby into the birth canal, everything except for the head. In this procedure, it is very important that the head not emerge from the womb, because that, of course, would be a live birth under the law. So the doctor actually grips the baby in a certain way described in the paper to ensure that the head does not emerge as well as the body. Then at the point where the entire baby has been delivered alive into the birth canal, except for the head, the doctor takes a long surgical scissors, such as this one, or some other similar medical device, and thrusts it through the base of the baby's skull, as shown in drawing number 4. This is generally what kills the baby. He removes the scissors, or the other puncturing instrument, and he inserts a tube, or a catheter. This tube is connected to a very powerful suction machine, which, when he turns it on, removes the baby's brain. This causes the skull to collapse, and the baby's head emerges, completing the delivery of the dead baby.
In a day and age of great technological advancements, we as a nation under God find ourselves confronted with a judicial decision that literally destroyed the very foundations of life in our country. Congressman J.C. Watts shares his views and those of his colleagues from the halls of Congress on the Supreme Court ruling on partial birth abortion legalizing infanticide.
We have just created this cavalier approach to this precious thing that God has given us called life, and now we've fine-tuned it to say that it's even okay to allow a child to be drawn down its mother's womb until you see the head, and use this brutal medical procedure called partial birth abortion to kill that child. And I just am deeply concerned that America would sign off on that.
It's time to awaken the moral conscience of a nation and a sleeping giant of the church to respond with one voice against the crumbling tide of moral, ethical, and spiritual decline in America. The voice of those who cannot speak is being heard on Capitol Hill as the terrible act of partial birth abortion is brought before Congress to enact a legislative ban.
Those 5 times that we voted on it, the president has vetoed it each time, which is unfortunate. I think Patrick Moynihan says it best. It's infanticide. It is a brutal, immoral procedure that we allow in the greatest nation in all the world to take place. Anything we do, I think we have to ask ourselves, is it constitutional? But I think we also have the obligation and responsibility to ask ourselves, is it right? Partial birth abortion is wrong. It is infanticide.
Well, I'm a nurse. I've had 15 years of experience in the nursing field. I've done just about every type of nursing you can imagine, from hospital, nursing home, emergency room, surgery, clinics, home care for a long time. And I was actually working for a nursing agency at the time, and they staff all those different types of facilities. They called me up one day and asked me if I would work at the Women's Medical Center. And I told them I would, because I didn't have a problem with abortion, or at least I didn't think I did. So I went into the clinic for 3 days of orientation with the understanding if everything worked out okay, I'd be hired by this doctor. And it was a full-time position that was opening up, and I was only working part-time at the time, so I was very excited about the job until I went in there. The first day I was there, the doctor does what's called D&C abortions. This is an abortion done on babies from about 5 to 10 weeks of pregnancy. He wanted me to watch every single procedure, so I stood right beside him to let me know what was going on. He wanted me to know everything. So I did. This D&C procedure, we brought women into the operating room. He has 2 of them. And we prepped her. We put her gown on her and put her on the table, put her legs in the stirrups. And the doctor goes in with a suction catheter, literally, and goes up inside her uterus and suctions out the contents. It was very bloody. I couldn't see a lot. It all went down a tube and into a jar. One particular thing that really stood out in my mind that first day was the 15-year-old girl in there having her third abortion. And she laughed the whole through it. It wasn't a big deal to her. It was just something she did. Unfortunately, a lot of these girls use abortion as their only means of birth control. And the sad thing is her parents didn't even know she was there. Didn't have to have permission, didn't have to even have notification. She just was there with her boyfriend. They also on the first day did the prep work for the partial birth abortion because it is a 3-day procedure. What they have to do is mechanically and forcefully dilate that woman's cervix. Of course, the cervix is the mouth of the womb, and the womb's where the baby's kept. And they do this with the rods. First of all, they use metal rods to mechanically dilate it, go in and force open the mouth of that cervix a little bit to where they can get these dilators in called laminaria. It's a seaweed-based product that looks like a tampon with a string on it. The doctor puts in about 5 to 10 of these that first day, depends on the woman. When it gets wet, it swells and it forces open that mouth, that cervix, forcing it to come open so you can get the baby out. He sends her home or to a local motel, she's not from around the area, with pain pills, an emergency number if anything happens. And the next day she comes back, we bring her in and we remove laminaria that he had put there the day before, and this time he puts in 15 to 25 of them, depending on the woman, and sends her home again. And I went home that night, and I didn't know if I could go back that third day or not because they told me somewhat what they were going to do with this next procedure. But I went back, I don't know if it was outside of trying to, stick out the assignment,
not wanting to admit that I was less than a professional. I was. God sent me back in there, even though probably it was one of the worst days of my life. I did go back, and on that third day, they did what's known as the abortion procedure. The first lady we did was 26 and 8. She had just found out that her baby had Down syndrome. And her boyfriend made her get this abortion. She didn't want it. As a matter of fact, the entire 3 days she was in there. So we did her first because she was the rest of the patients. And we brought her into the operating room and put her on the table and put her legs in the stirrups. And we started a night and gave her Valium just to calm her down so she wouldn't care what was going on. She didn't get a general anesthetic to knock her out. And I really thought those were dead at this point. I thought, they're not going to do this on a live baby. Sure, something's killed the baby. I don't know what I thought killed it, but you could see the heartbeat. As a matter of fact, I even asked the doctor. And I said, well, what's that? And he said, it's the heartbeat. I said, oh, okay. So he had me standing there, probably 3 feet from the baby, just so I wouldn't contaminate the sterile field. And taking a forceps, he went up inside the cervix and into the uterus and found one of the baby's feet and turned the baby in utero because it wasn't headed feet first. He has to bring the baby out feet first. So he brought the foot down through the birth canal. Then he went up and he grabbed the other foot and he brought it down through the birth canal until he had both of the feet on the outside. And grabbing his little feet with hands, he pulled the baby out of the mother breech position until he had the entire body, everything delivered except the head. And as I stood there, this baby's kicking his feet and moving his hands and fingers, and very much alive. Very careful to make sure that he holds the baby's head and fingers with his left hand to make sure that that head doesn't slip out. Because at about now, 3 inches, 3 seconds, for more, and he kills it, it's murder. But as long as he leaves that head in there, and he's very careful to make sure that head stays there, it doesn't matter how he kills it. It's an abortion and it's legal in this country. And as I stood there in horror, I watched this. The doctor took a pair of scissors and into the back of the baby's neck, back here, he plunged those scissors. And when he did this, the baby jerked out in a startle reaction. And he took the scissors and he opened it up to make a hole in the back of the neck. And he took a high-powered suction machine and a catheter, and he stuck that into the hole, and he literally suctioned out the baby's brains. And they went down the tube and into a jar.
And I almost hit the floor. I mean, I stood there and I thought, this isn't happening. This really isn't happening. I'm dreaming this. Please wake me up. And I choked back the tears and the lump in my throat. And I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. I didn't want to be in there, but it happened. He pulled the head out and he cut the cord and he delivered the placenta and threw it in the pan. And he cleaned her up and he took the baby out of the room. And this mom wanted to see her baby. We tried to talk her out of it, but she does have the right to see it. So we cleaned her up and put a pad on her and walked her to the ultrasound machine room. And we cleaned the baby up and put it in a little blanket and we handed it to her. And I don't know what she thought she was going to see, but I don't think it's what she saw, because she looked down in his little face and she started screaming to God to forgive her. And she held him and she rocked him and she begged him to forgive her. And at that point, I couldn't take it. I had to leave. I ran to the bathroom and beside a toilet I kneeled and I screamed at God and I said, God, why are you letting this happen? Why? Why does this have to happen? This is murder. I mean, I can't believe you'd allow this to happen. There were 7 of these done that day. Every one of the mothers were perfectly healthy. Nothing was wrong with them. They just waited later in their pregnancy to have an abortion. 1 baby had Down syndrome. The rest of them were perfectly healthy babies. I met all 7 of the women because of them being in the 2 days before to be dilated, and they shared. I don't know if they wanted to ease their conscience or if they just wanted to talk, but they shared why they were having the abortions. The majority of them were teenagers that either hid the pregnancy, denied the pregnancy. A lot of these teenagers, and some of them, were young teenagers, actually thought if they didn't think about it, the baby would go away. Actual denial, and a lot of teens do this, unfortunately. I went home that night and I just cried to my husband. I said, why? Why did I have to go through this? I mean, this is the most horrible thing I've ever seen in my life. I can't believe they do this. Then I found out a year and a half later that they were trying to outlaw this procedure, and I said, good, they ought to. And then that's when I came forth and actually testified before the United States Congress and many state congressional offices to try and pass a law to outlaw this procedure, because the public out there has no clue of what's going on behind these closed doors. They just hear abortion, well, abortion's a woman's right. She has a right to do what she wants to with her body. It wasn't her body they was doing it to. It was those little tiny babies that they were doing it to. And it was just incredible. I don't think I will ever get over seeing those babies move and flinch from the pain that was being inflicted in them. And then looking down into that little boy's face. If I've ever seen an angel, it was that day. And I'll never forget that. I've had time after time after time, that image has popped into my mind.
This is a particularly heinous, horrible kind of abortion. All abortions are horrible, but when the baby is actually partially born and in a very painful and in a very horrible way, the life snuffed out.
The reason to do this is to make sure you have a dead child rather than a living one at the end of the day. That's what it is.
You'd have to pick very hard to separate this from infanticide. Many times people have said, if you believe in abortion, would you kill a child the minute after it was born? And the answer is usually, no, I wouldn't. Well, here we're killing children who are half-born. And what's the difference?
This is about truth and a moral right. And you can't deny the fact that there's a lot of untruth associated with the position of allowing this to continue. And people who vote to allow this to continue shouldn't be in elected office.
Such a thing should not exist, but it does exist. And I believe that the American people have a right to know about it, and I believe that this procedure should not be used in this country.
If our society and if this Congress and this President can allow this to occur in this country, I think it speaks volumes as to how far we've gone in the insensitivity to life and in our whole focus on ourselves and what is good for me, irrespective of what's good for anybody else, even the most vulnerable among us, little children.
Some have likened this chart to a depiction of an appendicitis operation. My God. Appendicitis. That's not an appendix. That's not a blob of tissue. It is a baby. It's a baby.
Dr. William Stalter, a 30-year board-certified OB/GYN, has delivered over 6,000 babies. Formerly Chief of Staff and current Board of Trustees for an Ohio hospital, Dr. Stalter shares with our breakthrough team the truth about partial birth abortion.
Well, I've done about 6,000 deliveries over my 30 years as a career as an obstetrician gynecologist, and I've never encountered a situation where I felt personally that there was a case that had to have this procedure to resolve it.
Our president and pro-abortion groups have made strenuous efforts to persuade the public that partial birth abortions are necessary to protect the lives or health of pregnant women. Dr. Stalter disclaims this myth.
Well, it doesn't seem logical to me that you would choose a procedure that takes 3 days to accomplish in order to make an emergency to save the patient's life.
To understand the partial birth abortion procedure, Dr. Stalter gives a graphic reenactment of the procedure being performed on girls every day in abortion clinics all across the nation.
It's a procedure that involves about 3 days of total commitment. The patient feels pain during this time. Okay, it's like a miniature labor, so they're given pain medication to take along with them back to the motel or back home. And that gives them some relief from the cramps that they feel. This is a very painful dilation procedure. Now, once the dilation is accomplished, then they start the partial birth abortion procedure. And they usually scan the patient with ultrasound to see the position of the baby. If it's in the head down or vertex position, then they insert an instrument called a ring forceps up through this dilated cervix, and they grasp the leg or whatever they can get a hold of, and they try to turn this baby around. And that's a procedure that we call internal pedalic version, or turning. And then they pull the legs out so that the baby is delivered into what's called a breech presentation. Then when they get the baby down to where just the head remains in the uterus, then they take a pair of scissors and they actually puncture a hole right through the back of the baby's head. There's a hole in the skull where the spinal cord comes out called the foramen magnum. They puncture these scissors right through the foramen magnum into the brain, and then they open them up to enlarge the hole. Following that, they insert this suction curette tip into the brain, right into the middle of the head, and then they apply vacuum, and that suctions the baby's brains into the tubing in the bottle. So the baby comes out intact except for the head and the brains, which have been removed. So that's called a partial birth abortion.
Dr. Stalter firmly believes the public needs to be aware of the risks involved in partial birth abortion and associated medical complications, such as breast cancer, that can develop years later. He views this procedure as damaging women physically, emotionally, and spiritually. When asked how God views partial birth abortion, Dr. Stalter had this to say.
I think, God is very clear in His Word from many different sources, including Psalm 139, the first chapter of Jeremiah, that the baby is an individual and a person even in the uterus, even before it's conceived. So I think from God's eyes, there's no question that this is an individual.
Well, opponents of the ban on partial birth abortions will argue that this is used to save the life of the mother, or it's used because of severe deformities in the child. But I think the evidence has become overwhelming that in fact The vast majority of partial birth abortions is done for the convenience of the mother.
The vast majority of partial birth abortions are performed for purely elective reasons. They're performed on the healthy mothers of healthy babies. Those are the facts. The abortionists don't want to admit that, but that's the reality of partial birth abortion in this country.
No high-risk obstetrics group, those who deal in high-risk pregnancies, uses partial birth abortion. Partial birth abortions are done in abortion clinics, not by obstetricians who are concerned about saving the life of a mother in a difficult pregnancy or saving the mother's fertility or anything else. This was never, ever intended to be a procedure used to protect the health of the mother, and that's proven by the fact that no obstetric group in this country uses it for that purpose.
How does stabbing the child in the back of the head protect the mother? That's just ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense. But that's the kind of ridiculous claim that we're hearing from people on the other side, that this is necessary to protect the mother's health.
The term health of the mother is so broad that it could conceivably, and has historically, been interpreted to include emotional health, mental health, and therefore a physician, an abortionist, if you will, could justify an abortion on demand, and that has been the case under that term, health of the mother.
What President Clinton wants is a health of the mother exception, which is so broad as to invalidate the underlying bill and nullify its enforcement. The President's health exception would include virtually anything. If a mother walks in at 8 months and says that, you know, I'm depressed and I really don't want to have this baby and I'm feeling very depressed and I don't want to get out of bed anymore and I'm just feeling very down. And so the doctor can say as well, she's depressed, that's a health problem, she's under tremendous stress, that's a health problem, and so we can abort this baby. It perfectly helps. It's all up to the doctor to make that determination. So you give the physician complete carte blanche to be executioner, then judge and jury, because the doctor performs the abortion and then determines whether that abortion was in fact done for the health of the mother. A leading abortionist in this country, a guy by the name of Warren Hearn from Boulder, Colorado, who does second and third trimester abortions, who has said, in fact was quoted in USA Today during the Senate debate, that he will certify that every pregnancy causes a serious risk to the health of the mother. Every pregnancy. And so what he has said is that any exception for health is no exception, that in fact you would allow this procedure to continue unabated. Partial birth abortions are done in abortion clinics, not by obstetricians who are concerned about saving the life of a mother in a difficult pregnancy or saving the mother's fertility or anything else. They're done at abortion clinics on healthy mothers and healthy babies, in most cases not even by obstetricians.
You have to do what the older obstetricians called a podalic version. Reach into the uterus, find the baby's feet, turn the baby around in the uterus, extract the feet in a breech delivery, and then just before the head is delivered, destroy the baby's life by sucking out its brain. Just that podalic version alone is a very serious threat to the future of that mother's uterus. And so rather than preserving that woman's fertility, I think very likely they would produce an incompetent cervix, which would very seriously threaten her future fertility.
This is a baby that's about 18, 20 weeks, and this is a pregnant cervix. When you go in and forcefully and manually dilate the cervix, this opening here, the cervix is a muscle. When you force it open when it wasn't meant to be forced open until a woman goes through labor and hormones are released to dilate it, what nature does, that's what labor is. You damage it, you weaken it. So the next time she has a baby, say she wants it this time, or she's pregnant, and the baby gets a little bit of weight on it and it bears down on that muscle's weak. The cervix opens up and out pops the baby and she has a miscarriage. Nature didn't mean that to happen now, and they're damaging that muscle. So you talk about future fertility? One of the women that stood before Clinton the day that he vetoed this bill has had 5 miscarriages since her partial birth abortion procedure. It's a very dangerous procedure.
Dr. Nancy Romer has been an obstetrician for the past 20 years. 5 years ago, she was asked to testify before the Ohio legislature on the subject of partial birth abortion because of her personal knowledge of 2 patients who had received partial birth abortions.
I've had 2 patients that were patients of mine. Both of them were well into their second trimester. One was 24 weeks, one was 25, who chose to kill their babies, not because their babies were handicapped, not because they had serious medical illnesses, but because of social circumstances. One was a teenager who her mother just did not want her to be pregnant. The other was another woman whose boyfriend left her mid-pregnancy and she felt that she just couldn't continue. There was no medical reason. There was no health reason. These women just did not want to deliver these babies and would not consider adoption. And to say that these procedures are occurring in rare and unusual circumstances denies the fact that women who just don't want to be pregnant are having these procedures done.
When the bill went before the U.S. Senate, she was asked to participate in the Senate Judicial Committee hearings in Washington, D.C. Breakthrough visited with Dr. Romer at her office regarding the latest decision upheld by the Supreme Court.
I was devastated when the Supreme Court struck down the Nebraska law banning partial birth abortion. I took it personally, but I've come to realize that there is evil in this world and that partial birth abortion is evil. And no matter how hard it is to stand up, you just have to do that.
Dr. Romer testified that there is never a situation in which partial birth abortion would be medically necessary.
The American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, which is the governing board for obstetricians and gynecologists, put out a statement in 1994, and they stated that their committee of experts could find no situation where partial birth abortion would be the only procedure available to a woman to either preserve her health or future fertility. Now, these are people who, on a political platform, are adamantly pro-abortion. Their biggest concern is the availability of abortion and the number of abortion providers. And they have said that this is not the only procedure necessary for the life or health of women.
Dr. Romer believes God's eyes are filled with a mixture of anger, disgust, and pity because of the destruction of His most precious creation.
I think God looks at our society as a whole with a mixture of anger, disgust, and pity. Disgust that we will not accept our children if they are handicapped, that if a child does not meet our specific needs and our requirements, that we will kill it. If we can't protect the weakest members of our society, unborn children, then we're all at risk. I think that they need to pray hard and think about what their call is and know that you must stand up to evil or evil will win. And we can't let that happen.
The partial birth abortion method is not recognized by the medical community. It's not found in any textbook. Matter of fact, the reason that it's not recognized is because it puts women's health and their reproductive chances at great risk. It does not lessen their risk for having problems. It increases their risk for having problems with future pregnancies. That's why it's not an accepted procedure. That's not why it should not ever be performed.
There are no medical indications for partial birth abortion to save the life or health of the woman. Absolutely none. Number one, again, a woman with a handicapped child is not at risk. Number two, if a woman has a medical illness that is complicating her pregnancy and needs to be delivered, what is required is separation of the fetus from the mother, not death of the fetus. Delivery of the baby and giving it to the high-risk pediatricians allows both the mother and the baby to have a chance for life. This procedure offers no advantage over delivery of a live fetus. It still takes 3 days. So if we're talking about acute emergencies, this procedure has no benefit whatsoever. Clearly, it is not taught in residency programs, and it is something that has been developed by abortion providers to satisfy their need to deliver a dead baby.
There's an ethical context to medicine, and this procedure has been rightly called just too close to infanticide, and no society, and certainly doctors, should not be tolerating such a brutal practice.
The American Medical Association had a large discussion on this and voted to support legislation banning this procedure.
It was particularly telling when the American Medical Association came out in favor of the ban on partial birth abortions. This association, which has not in the past necessarily been a friend of the pro-life movement, said here is a procedure that is indefensible and that it's never medically necessary, that there are always options. It's never necessary to take the life of that unborn child.
90% of these abortions are done on healthy mothers with healthy babies in the 5th and 6th month of pregnancy, which is the 2nd trimester. And they're done for one reason. Because it's the mother doesn't want to carry the baby anymore. It's an inconvenience or whatever.
Has nothing to do with terribly malformed children, because they can be cared for in other ways. So what it is a lie. And it's a lie that's based on convenience and greed for abortionists and for people who just want to terminate a pregnancy late.
Well, the practitioners of partial birth abortion have been very clear that in the vast majority of cases, these are healthy babies of healthy women, and this is being done for social reasons or personal reasons. There is no medical need whatever. Some abortionists prefer this method of doing abortions in the 5th and 6th month of pregnancy, or even later, because they find it much quicker than the alternative methods. The alternative methods are more time-consuming, and they involve, for example, dismembering the baby inside the womb, which is a difficult task and a time-consuming task. These practitioners, these abortion doctors, have found it faster to simply partially deliver the baby while still alive until only the head remains within the womb, and then kill the baby and complete the delivery. They find that this is more convenient for them, but there is no medical reason for it.
There often do arise cases where you have to terminate a pregnancy because of a health risk to the mother. But a termination of a pregnancy is not the same as an abortion. Giving birth is a termination of a pregnancy. At this stage in a pregnancy, all that you need to do is induce labor and deliver the child, and give that child the same treatment and care you would any other child that was born prematurely. So the only reason for doing this procedure is to make sure you have a dead child rather than a live one.
What it is a technique that's designed to make it a quick and easy thing to abort a live child and say that you did the right thing.
But you don't have to kill the baby in inducing labor and delivering the baby with a normal delivery or through a cesarean section. You can always, after 20 weeks, you can always deliver the baby or do a cesarean section and give that baby the dignity of being born. It may not survive in many cases, but at least what you haven't done is inflict violence on this little baby that is undeserving of that treatment in our society. We should give that baby every chance.
Today's headlines echo our national shame as the heinous act of partial birth abortion is upheld by the highest court in our land. America is at a strategic inflection point. With insight into the recent Supreme Court ruling on partial birth abortion, here's Douglas Johnson, Legislative Director, National Right to Life Committee.
Well, the partial birth abortion method has become the focus of legislative efforts, both federal and state, over the last 5 years, and more than half the states have passed bills to ban partial birth abortion. As you know, this is an abortion method where the baby is delivered feet first into the birth canal, everything except for the head. The abortionist then punctures the base of the baby's skull and literally sucks out the brain with a high-powered suction machine. Now, the new development, of course, is that the Supreme Court on June 28th ruled that the states may not ban partial birth abortion. It was a 5-4 decision, but the 5 justices in the majority took a very extreme position that the states must allow even this brutal partial birth abortion procedure anytime an abortionist wants to do one.
The method of killing a human child proscribed by this statute is so horrible that the most clinical description of it evokes a shudder of revulsion.
There's a lot of data, by the way, that the vast majority of abortions at this point in pregnancy, and we're talking about the 5th month, the 6th month, are done for no medical reason at all. They are done simply because the woman has decided she does not want to carry the baby to term. And the Supreme Court has defined health abortions to include all of those done to help the woman's emotional well-being in the abortion doctor's own judgment. So that really is not a restriction. That is a license to abortion doctors to do these late-term abortions whenever they want.
On numerous occasions, Congress has voted to prohibit partial birth abortions. And in response to presidential veto, both houses voted to override that veto, most recently falling just 2 votes short in the Senate.
Here's a situation where the abortion industry and the extreme pro-abortion special interest groups really are opposed to any limitations on abortion. And when you hear them saying, I'm for a ban on late-term abortions, really they mean that they think that abortions in the 5th and 6th months should be allowed with no restriction whatever. These are big babies. These are babies 8 or 9 inches long. They feel tremendous pain when this procedure is done to them. These are babies big enough to be born alive and survive at least for hours, for days, or indefinitely in prenatal units around this country.
The blood of man should never be shed but to redeem the blood of man. It is well shed for our family, for our friends, for our God, for our country, for our kind. The rest is vanity. The rest is crime. It is ordained in the eternal constitution of things that men of intemperate minds cannot be free. Their passions forge their fetters. Hate the evil, love the good, and establish judgment in the gate. It may be that the Lord God of hosts will be gracious unto the remnant of Joseph.
Thousands, we believe the thousands of partial birth abortions that are being performed in this country would be allowed to continue to be performed under the President's so-called compromise language. And of course, when Ron Fitzsimmons came forward and acknowledged that he had lied to the American people, he had consciously, deliberately, bald-facedly lied to the American people as to the number of partial birth abortions and on whom they are performed, I think it's helped to open the eyes of the American people that, in fact, this is a procedure that is never justifiable.
Just get them done as fast as you can because time's money. He had 2 operating rooms. We would get a lady ready in one while he was in the other one doing a procedure. And we'd better have that woman on the table ready, prepped by the time he got finished in the first operating room so he could come in and do the other one. And while he was in the operating room too, we would be in the other one getting that woman out of there and getting it cleaned up and another one done. So when he left this clinic, he was only there for a few short hours. He would go to his Cincinnati clinic and do more of them. And he travels around to all of them and does abortions. It's very much a job to him, assembly line type process.
The procedure involved in this case is extremely rare. It involves tragic and traumatic circumstances late in pregnancy in cases where the mother's life or health is in danger.
They are rare. They are exceptional. They are there because a woman's life and health is in danger. Because this is an unprecedented intrusion in what should be properly a decision made between the doctor and his or her patient on what is a very, very critical decision for a woman having to make in these rare instances. And I emphasize that because these are rare instances.
So what is before us is a bill to outlaw a medical procedure that is rare, that is used in the most tragic circumstances. It is a dangerous procedure, a late-term abortion is. It is a rare thing that happens.
There has been little focus by the proponents of the bill on the risk of the health of women if this alternative is not available, the types of health problems that compel late-term abortions in the first place, and the important question of the constitutional implications of withholding access to a procedure that may in fact be necessary to save the life or preserve the health of a pregnant woman facing a tragic pregnancy. It's estimated that we're talking about roughly 600 abortions per year that take place under the most dire circumstances. In fact, these abortions take place only when the life or health of the woman is at risk.
people who vote to allow this to continue shouldn't be in elected office because they represent an immoral position. And knowing now that the opposite side has admitted that they were lying on it, to continue to maintain that means you think it's fine to kill babies that are 38, 39 weeks. That, we might as well just let them be born and then we'll decide which ones we keep and which ones we don't. I mean, that's the position that's taken by those who support this procedure.
The President's opposition to the Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act demonstrates the extreme position that the President has in support of abortion rights. The President is out of step with many people in his own party. The Democratic leader in the House supported the Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act. Other prominent Democrats have supported it, but the President is way out there on a limb supporting the hardcore pro-abortion position. And if he can support partial birth abortion, he will support anything.
It's a very dangerous procedure for women, and if he really cares about these women, he would sign this bill. But yet President Clinton still says he's going to veto this bill. Why? Because it doesn't matter what kind of abortion anybody could perform, Clinton would defend it. Has nothing to do with right or wrong.
Children beginning at that, around the stage most of these taking place, which is in the second trimester, they feel pain. In fact, they feel pain, probably they're more sensitive to pain than newborns are.
It's documented, we've had testimony, it's known in terms of neurologic development. The babies feel severe pain as the back of their skull is opened and as their calvarium is penetrated.
Clearly, if we're talking about greater than 26 weeks, these babies do feel pain.
I sometimes just have to sit here and pinch myself and wonder whether this is all real. Whether this really is the United States of America.